Good evening out there. We are live today with Jim Crooks, the master blender at Firestone Walker. Barrelworks. How you doing, Jim?
Doing good. Thanks, Marco.
It's 3 hours back over there, so I have a feeling that as we do this interview, being in Miami, you're going to see this go black behind me, and hopefully we can still see my face. But how's it going over there, man? You guys are busy. I mean, just following you guys on social media, it's incredible to see you guys are constantly doing something.
It seems like it. We try to stay busy. I mean, that's kind of the impetus of having this production facility was to keep it going and keep it real and keep the pipeline full of these beers. We've been given just a beautiful place to work and given a free range to make a lot of beers. Basically, sky's the limit on creativity side, but we do have 4 production beers this year that'll do roughly about 200 barrel production runs, 3,000 cases, 300 keg kind of releases. Those are pretty big for us. Those will take us, better part of about a month to do packaging and then labeling for that. So that's right there. You knock off 4 months of the year that we're doing main releases. Then we scatter in a bunch of different small releases in between all that stuff to keep it fun and try to act upon the seasonality of California with the fresh fruit side and the grape side of things. So the summer months get really busy trying to grab onto what's coming through, be it fresh fruit, be it anything from the trees like peaches, apricots. We've done, we did pomegranates last year. This year we've gotten cherimoyas off the vines already. A lot of grapes come through this part of the vicinity of San Ynez Valley, and we've tapped into that, making about 7 different grape wine hybrids last year. So those are all clustered into a very short window of probably about 2.5, 3 months. So things get pretty hectic about then, but usually round out the year with a couple releases that we'll do with IQF fruit stuff that we can't get in California, and then maybe some barrel aged stuff, bourbon barrel aged stuff that'll round out the year. So this year we're looking at roughly about 1,200 barrels in package released to the public, and growing the program upwards to about 3,400 barrels of capacity this year, we're hoping.
Wow.
So we intend to release somewhere similar to that next in 2017. So almost a double increase in production next year.
Nice. So where were we at last year versus this year then in production?
We were at last year 800 barrels released to the public, which seems like a teeny minuscule amount, which it is in terms of what Firestone's annual production is, which I think upwards of like 200 to 300,000 barrels this year. So we're less than like 1% of what's going on up in Paso. But if you look at what we're doing down here, we don't have a brew house. So we're transporting wort from Paso Robles down the 101 down to Buellton, and that takes about 90-minute transfer from Knockout into the tanker truck up in Paso, straight down the 101 here to here, and we're usually receiving about 80 to 100 barrels at a time, and we can ferment that in primary and stainless here. So if you just look at that production, to do what we want to do this year, we're basically brewing every other week up in Paso and receiving a tanker truck like every other week. So it keeps things moving, and it is an impact on their production. So they're definitely dictating in Paso how quick we can churn beers out of Paso. If they have a really busy week, we might get bumped. We'll be the first people to get bumped, actually. So production facility here, it's we have to just roll with the punches how things go. But currently, we're building a new brew house up in Paso, which will definitely help ease their needs on what they can do for us and increase our production needs here. So I'm hoping that'll be 2017, probably mid 2017 when that solution comes on board, and then things will be rolling big time.
There's no one that's going to stop the Pivo train coming through, right?
Yeah, there's a couple trains rolling out of that brewery right now. Pivo being one of them, I'm sure. I think they have a steady stream of Union Jack coming out of there, and the newest monster they created was the 805 brand, which is a really beautiful blonde ale that's been coming out in its own package. Beautiful can, 805, and it's just increased popularity over the course of since I've worked for the brewery. It's insane. It is probably the flagship of the brewery now. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt that you guys are getting your work from a guy named Matt Bernelson either. I mean, that's gotta ease the stress level of what's being put into the barrels for you.
Yeah, I can't speak highly enough about Matt and his crew up in Paso. I know them all personally. I've worked with all of them that are making beer. A lot of the crew, the brewing side and cellaring side, as well as packaging, have been there from the early days of Firestone Walker. They're ingrained in that system. They know quality as well as anybody up there. And the wort that comes down, it's always spot on. They're always up to my ideas of tweaking things. They have their own ideas. I love opening up the forum to like hear what they wanted. If they have some ideas on how things go, and of course, running anything by Matt, you get his brain turning on things, and it turns into an amazing new project. So it's a really fun outlet for them too, I believe.
So I guess it's a good kind of segue into one of the questions I had, which was, so a lot of the guys that are doing this kind of contract, it's like a pseudo contract brewing because it's your own brewery, but are you dictating I guess the question is, are you using a lot of the wort they're producing already, or are you actually going through and creating your own recipes down in Buellton and saying, hey, we want something like this, can you guys produce it?
That's a good question, and I think to answer that, I could do like a two-part thing, because really Barrelworks started off just the creative side of my daily routine up in Paso, which was quality control management, running the labs up there, and really having a want to look and investigate into wild fermentations. So in about 2007, I got my hands on some critters from both New Belgium Brewing Company and Russian River. They were generous enough to share some of their dregs with me from some of their fooders. I think in one of the fooders from New Belgium, and then also Vinny loaned me some chips out of one of his barrels. I could say loaned. That's funny because he could loan them. I could give them back. So those came into my possession, and really what started off the project was just kind of sneaking some finished beer off a filter, or even off some kegs that had been returned to the brewery due to some out of code stuff. So Hefeweizen was a finished beer I used, and then Double Barrel was always a beginner beer to use because of the plentifulness of it. I think more or less it was our flagship back in 2007. So stealing a keg off the filter wouldn't leave anyone out of beer, or they wouldn't even notice it. So that's how it started, using kind of what was at my palms, my fingertips. And then as we started growing the project, doing a full turn off the brew house wasn't really going to be an option for me. So I started using Hefeweizen wort or finished beer coming out of the brew house and on a much greater scale, pushing maybe like 30 or 40 barrels into kegs. And then also the beer that was returned from the market, if it wasn't super hoppy, I would sequester it and bring it back to the cave, we called it, and start using that. So really, when the project by 2012, the project was all fed off of existing wort streams and existing beers that Firestone had made. It wasn't until the middle of 2012 when we decided we were going to go forward with the idea of Barrelworks being its own entity, and actually moving it down to Buellton when we thought about how we were going to start building this idea. And that's when we did brew a saison created just for Barrelworks with a recipe that was augmented to give us results that we were hopefully intending. It started with a saison. It started with blonde ale being another great beer to work with, just because of the nature of it being low IBU, being fairly low in alcohol, and easy to run off in the brew house, and it had already been plugged in a lot in the brew house. So peeling off 17 or 20 barrels here and there from their existing brews that were going on was no problem. So really, it was like I had to call them up and find out what was going on, they'd say, here's what we got going on this week. So I'd say, hey, can I peel off some work from this beer, this brew, or this brew? And that worked great through 2012. And it wasn't really until mid 2013 when I started talking to Matt. We started tweaking the recipes, adding more wheat, changing mash profiles, adjusting IBUs on certain beers, and then also creating completely different brews. So that basically led into us now having about 5 different beers that we've tweaked and augmented that are really their own creatures for Barrelworks, and those beers are brewed specifically for us. No one else is getting that wort up in Paso now, so it is kind of its own unique wort stream that Barrelworks is now fermenting. So
cool,
yeah.
Cool. So I guess you've been at Firestone since '99.
That brewery that they habitate since '99. Matt and I both worked for Slow Brewing Company starting in '99, and then that company was taken over by Firestone Walker in mid 2001.
Sure.
Yep.
And you were also brewmaster prior to Matt, right? For a short stint.
I wouldn't call myself brewmaster. I was a rookie brewer off the streets that was brought in to help those guys out with some quality control issues. But once I got myself involved, I realized that there was really no direction. So I had to learn professional brewing from the ins and outs immediately. So that's what my task was, and then also put a professional micro lab together in the brewing setting. So it was a crash course in brewing and a crash course in beer quality the first 6 months of my career. And luckily, about 6 months into it, Matt was brought on as brewmaster. He's straight out of Goose Island at that point, had done almost exactly the same thing that I'd been doing for Slow Brew, which was fixing a micro problem that Goose had at that point. And he'd worked himself up into a brewing position as well. He and I then were partnered up, and basically the rest is history, because by 2001, Firestone Walker had taken over most of the operation up there, but hadn't really moved their operation up to Paso Robles yet. So Matt and I were able to work together, build a team starting from just 2 of us to take on all the different operations, be it brewing, cellaring, packaging, shipping and receiving. So he basically was able to build a team of stellar people around him from the ground up, which is a very rare opportunity, I'd say.
Yeah. So it kind of lends itself that you have a educational background in microbiology,
food science,
and then you go into quality control, and now you're dealing with lots of different organisms on a daily basis. Do you see it as a natural progression to where you're at today from where you started, or is it kind of like I took a left turn somewhere, ended up here?
It is somewhat of a left turn I think for a natural progression to be, I guess, looked at. Quality is such a different beast when it comes to professional brewing. It's very stringent. The practicality of having a wild program in a microbrewery the size of Firestone Walker is dangerous. It's a dangerous card to play, and it doesn't mate well with ales and lagers being produced on a daily basis in a cellar that's super clean that we don't pasteurize in. So I knew that it was not in the cards to have a wild program, a legitimate wild program up in Paso, and I think Matt knew it as well, and I knew the danger of working with the microbes I was working with in the vicinity to clean beers. It's playing with fire, and we were really lucky to continue the program over the course of the first 5 years that it was in its conception. The beers that were coming out I was lucky to have really good beers coming out from the get-go, was releasing some things in the public under the guise of Firestone Walker that were wild and sour, but were received really well, and that really helped gain some momentum with Matt, with the owners. And it wasn't really till 2012 when I think 2011, 2012, when Adam Firestone's, one of his sons posted a picture of one of the sour beers on Facebook. And I remember Adam walking into the lab and questioned me. He's like, do we have a sour beer program? And I said, yeah, we do. He's like, how long have we had this? And I was like, well, like about 3 years now. And he's like, well, we're not going to have that much longer, right? And I was like, we ran out of places to hide it. It became the redheaded stepchild of our brewery for about 6 months, until David Walker fortuitously took a trip to Belgium and got to tour a couple of the cellars in Belgium, and came back with a new vision and a new understanding and a new appreciation for sour beer and for wild ales. And he assured me that there was a future. And that's when he asked if I was willing to take over, and basically drive the ship for the program. And at that point, I was at, I think about 13 years into doing quality control for Firestone Walker, 12 or 13 years. And we were growing at a really good clip. So I thought, I've heard always that there's 7 careers you're supposed to have in this world before you exit. And I was lucky enough to, might be my third career now that I've moved on to have a chance to do this. It's an honor for me to be, making these beers and have a chance to really learn a whole new side of fermentation, a side of microbiology that really I would never had a chance to invest time into unless I had this project. So for us, I think it's for Firestone as well. It's a true endeavor to really take what we know and apply it to new endeavors. And this is, something that Firestone, it has wood involved. It's a lot of creativity. It's in the same vein of where we came from as like wine. So I think they saw it as a natural progression for us to get involved into it. I think it's just by chance being in the time and place that where I was, it's just a really lucky door opening for me to jump into being this sour beer guy for Firestone.
Yeah, how did so we talked a little bit about the fear at Firestone having you guys there, you moved an hour and a half. I mean,
yeah.
I know there's practical reasons behind that. When we chatted with Jeffers, we were talking about, the kind of the building was already owned and down there, and it's in wine country, so there's sourcing for barrels, and it just kind of makes sense to be there. But it's kind of funny that, we don't want it anywhere near. Let's move it an hour and a half south.
Yeah, it took some convincing by David to me to like buy into the idea of it being this far away from where my home base was and kind of where my family was. And once I got down here taking a look at the space, and you have to understand that, I was working under tarps for many years up there doing this project, and this project was moved in and out of different warehouses multiple times. At one point I came to work, it was in the street. All 20-something barrels of mine were in the street, and I was, livid, had to talk to some people, talk me off the ledge, and we ended up moving it into a warehouse on the facility near the brewing facility, just kind of across the street. That was an old winery, so it lived in there, but we outgrew that spot almost within a few months because the idea was to grow this project. And when you're dealing with the firepower that brew house can produce and having the ability to purchase a lot of barrels in that area. So we were able to grow the project really quickly from, something like 28 barrels up to 400 barrels within about 6 months. We just outgrew any place that we could find up in Paso. So from the sake of just getting some room, coming down to Buellton made a lot of sense to me. And when Jeffers came in and got involved and helped, define the vision of how things were going to look, and assured me that that quality was going to be a very big important factor, that temperature control was going to be a big important factor, that he had Adam's ear on, the tasting room and the aesthetics of a lot of things. And that really helped settle a lot of people's nerves. And then David Walker obviously he was the big cheerleader on our corner, helping get things settled down here. This was a bonded wine warehouse. This is about 14,000 square feet of which was going to be intended to be a brewery before they'd bought Paso. So it sat kind of dormant, with set up with drains, with electrical and amenities and utilities to have the infrastructure to build a brewery, but it was never put on paper. So it was really cool for me, an option to basically start from the ground up again and build my own facility specifically for making these kind of beers. So of course I jumped at the chance to do that.
Yeah, it's actually, I think Jeffers was telling a story that Adam, he had a name for the sour project. Like, he hates wild ales, right? Like, he hates wild beer. Then it was the Feral One that kind of came out of him, like a name.
Jeffers? Yeah, Jeffers came up with the idea of Feral One. And before that, the project was called Skunkworks up in Paso. And so it slowly, as word got out that we had a sour beer program, the sales staff slowly found out kind of where it was, and so did Matt. So the brew house tour would eventually lead outside, out back door. They'd walk down the block to an abandoned warehouse, which everyone thought was not being used, and they'd walk into this program that was, barreled and under tarps. And that's when Matt started pulling nails. And I heard years later that was a kind of one of the big highlights of the tours up in Paso. So that, again, it was like, getting that under control and having, all accounted for here and creating a kind of this beautiful ode to wood and barrel beer brewing that we have now. It made a lot of sense for Firestone to kind of just embrace it finally and make something of it.
Yeah, and it seems like, maybe it may sound obvious for me to say, but it seems like this kind of project is the next big thing for the country. We're seeing a lot of breweries pop up that are only doing wild ales in oak. Your neighbors to the north, the Rare Barrel, for example, being one of them. Side project out east. So seems like it may be part of the future, but it's kind of it's cool about it is it's kind of like harking back to the tradition. It's kind of coming full circle in brewing where we're seeing it as modern or the next big thing, but it's really something that's been done for ages.
It has definitely. So if I can comment on that, it's after touring Belgium and seeing the how the beer industry there has fought to keep these beers alive. I think really America as a whole, if you're to look at America as a beer drinking nation, they have a lot of education to still learn. I think the overall consensus would be that America's palate's still the palate of a child, and that these beers will they'll be around, but it's not like I wouldn't think that this is going to be a revolution happening in the next decade. It'll be a lot slower than I think the IPA craze that's happened over the last 10 years. I really think that these beers take time to become more acceptable in people's household, refrigerators, because of the nature of the flavors. They're challenging, and they can be very challenging. So can the aromas, and there's education need to go along with this. This isn't just one generation. We're not even one generation into this idea here in the United States of craft beer brewing. So when you look at Belgium, we're 3-4 generations deep of tradition, and it's taken that long. And there's been an ebb and flow of popularity of those beers as well. So I can't tell you I can't read the crystal ball what's going to happen with these beers, but we do enjoy making them, and we strive to make some of the some great flavors and try to keep people's ideas of what these beers are open, just by throwing a lot of different flavors and aromas at people. And hopefully some of them stick and people get interested. That's the idea.
Beyond the complexity part and the kind of challenging flavors and things things you were kind of mentioning, part of it is that these beers are a lot more expensive to make too, so they have a higher price tag. So once you educate the people on what they are, then you got to convince them that they have to pay more money for them versus an IPA they can go and spend $5 on a pint. And so it becomes a different animal too, I think. But in my opinion, it's so worth it. I mean, I've had a bunch of the Firestone Barrelworks beers, thanks to you guys in part. But they're such beautiful beers, and they are so it's kind of fitting that you're in wine country down there because they're so wine-like in that they're subtle, they're nuanced. There's multiple layers to them, coming from the yeast, coming from the bacteria, coming from so many different aspects coming at you. They're just such a really phenomenal food beer. They're phenomenal on their own. I mean, they're kind of like wine has been for many people. They're thought-provoking beers as well. They're not so straightforward, which is something that I love. Do you guys strive to have that complexity, or is it just something that kind of naturally, and this is maybe a dumb question, but is it just something that kind of just naturally happens when you combine these wild yeasts and bacteria together?
First off, there's no dumb questions, Marco. And I was that kid in college, always raising my hand, like stopping everything, going, what about this though? And so I got to wear the hat a lot of times as being the dummy, but I pride myself in having the courageousness to stop the class and ask those questions. And I think that did lead me down this pathway of really wanting to understand complexity in beers and understand the nuances and what layers are. And I think part of the reason why this project was for both Jefferson and I, we talked about at the beginning, was that we were going to start working with winemakers and really crack that code of what, that mystery behind what winemaking is, because I think there's a lot of allure in, by people have about winemakers and, these products that are sold for thousands of dollars a bottle, and what makes it so expensive, and, what's the lingo. And I really wanted to understand more about, what these guys' minds were thinking. So this definitely has been an option to work with a lot of winemakers and see what they're thinking and learn from their tastes and learn from their perspective on things as far as what complexity is. And I would say though, as a whole, coming back from the roots of Firestone Walker and our program up in Paso, that we were always searching for complexity in those beers. We were searching for layers. We were also searching for a synergy between ingredients and complexity. So those are attributes that they don't really train. There's no classes for that. That just comes from paying attention to your taste buds and asking questions like, what is that, or what am I getting there, and then searching it out or finding someone that can tell you what that answer is, and learning from that explanation. And again, I mean, if we were to look forward then back to Barrelworks, when you add oak as a component, when you add the difference of acetic to lactic acid, the tactile sensation of those two acids, when you add the difference in pH, how that affects things like flavors, sugars, when you add fruit and oxidation in ways that you're not used to, you start learning a new vocabulary to these flavors and aromas that are really foreign to you. So it's been this amazing trip of learning descriptive words to be able to speak that lingo between us, between say Bo and Jeffers and myself and Matt, be able to speak on a level that we understand what we're saying. Because when I got into this, it was predominantly for the micro side of things, was to see how these bacteria, these wild yeast acted upon the substrates, sugar substrates, or how they were inhibited by IBUs, or how adding wheat malt or changing the mash profile changed things. And now it's understanding a lot of that and really enjoying that, but also the whole fifth element of the barrel aging and using French or American oak, or using wine barrels that came from, you know, a certain winery with a, you know, wider bed in it, using, you know, bourbon barrels and to add complexity, or even just looking at how barrel to barrel there's a difference in flavor and aromas that that's not consistent, even though that your batch was filled exactly the same into each barrel and there's not going the same in each barrel. Just knowing that, you know, basically you have to treat every barrel as its own individual fermenter. There's so much to learn in that. I mean, and then looking at what the attributes of those barrels are and how they might add complexity to your blend, and seeing things not as batches anymore, but as individualistic, you know, colors of a palette that you're painting a picture with, and using those to enhance or nuance your blends in terms of oak or tactile acidity or aroma. It's really opened up a whole world, and it's a learning process. You know, I think it's a worthy process that'll take a lifetime for me.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And when going to Belgium and hearing the Belgians talk about their beers and trying to pick up the secretive, you know, undertones of what they're saying and learn from that too, it's always a learning process. I would.
It's like Jean Van Roy says, the beer will tell you when it's ready, kind of thing. That's what you're kind of getting at is learning that.
Yeah, that is so true. And I had not really understood that until, you know, this project, and a few years into this project, when, you know, that kind of kept reverberating and holding back on things that, you know, in a normal world you just go, okay, that's it, let's go, let's move forward, and not look at too closely. But now it's, you know, picking everything apart, wanting to make complexity and not just turn out something that is, you know, smooth and easy, but actually add that one nuance in the back of the beer that you just can't put your finger on, that keeps that person thinking. That's our goal, really.
Yeah, that one like cheesy note, you know, or the one kind of, there's like green apple in this one that I'm picking up type of thing, you know.
Quite a layered in there, just to a point where you can't really pick it out, but it's there, and it keeps that, you know, that spark going of like the next sip. You know, you want that next sip to try to get it and again, and hopefully it creates a conversation among the people that are drinking it.
Yeah. So how does that process kind of go? You know, where you're learning your barrels. You know, I know that when I fill this barrel, I'm going to get these kinds of qualities to it. Is it kind of like, you know, for example, I fill, let's use 4 barrels, for example, with the same wort, the same rates of bacteria and yeast, and now I'm tasting these barrels as they evolve, and I'm taking notes on each individual barrel, kind of thing. Is that kind of how the process goes? I mean,
if we're, like, say if we're doing a blend, maybe like a 50 barrel blend or something like that, where we know we're going to bring 20 something barrels down, if they're individual wine barrels, or if we have punch-ins, the normal protocol is to take everything down, take a pH and taste it, and take notes on those barrels, and start tracking, looking for consistent attributes between barrel to barrel. So, you know, say it's agrestic ale. There's a note that we're looking for. It's a tea-like quality. It might be like an Earl Grey tea-like thing. There's a hoppiness, kind of a bitterness in the back end. There's a, you know, kind of a nice soft mid palate. So we start taking notes, looking for that to recreate, but then also looking for the outliers. And within, you know, normally within about 20 something barrels, you're going to find 1 or 2 outliers that are, you know, either in a good sense, something that would add that complexity or add that like an earthiness, or might add a little bit more oak. And some of them might not be performing up to what your standards are, so those might just be pushed aside because they're different. But normally you're looking for consistency. So I would normally take, you know, a swath of the main consistent barrels and immediately start pushing those in, and then all the while looking for the ones that are outliers, either to save for other blends later, or to keep my eye on to make sure they're progressing, maybe even to re-inoculate because they're not progressing quick enough. And then keep an eye on that. But a lot of those ones will be, you know, those tail ends of either side of that blend, if they're not working, will be put away for future usage. And then, not really pigeonholing yourself into just a color or a style of beer, looking at things like, oh, so we have this beautiful base beer. Remember those really oaky barrels that we put Bredeweizen or Little Opal into? Let's taste one of those and just see what they look like. And if that's what you're looking for, if you can't find that nuance in that batch, just to look outside that batch for something to put into the blend. And the rule of thumb that we always use was like a 10% of anything into a big blend. You're not going to see it or taste it, unless it's like you're blending stout into pale ale.
Yeah.
But hoppy into non-hoppy or non-hoppy into hoppy, you're not gonna get it. And the same thing, really, I think from the standpoint of what we're doing here with acid beers, it plays true. So there are ways of adding complexity to a bigger blend by looking outside what your batch is. And we're not normally looking at batches. So for us, we're looking at a swath of what aggressive ale might be, what we built into our cellar for the last 3 years. So we always go with we look for complexity first. So we'll bring 3 years of aggressive down and say, okay, here's what we got. And it might be that the 2-year-old aggressives, that's the most consistent thing. That'll be the base of this blend. And then we'll use some of the young stuff in there because we want to keep that moving to open up some new barrels to age. And then maybe there's some old stuff we'll put into the end of that, just to add that little something that keeps you thinking or brings your mind back to like the aggressive we had last year, something like that. And then we also look at titratable acidity, pH, and gravity. Those are the specs that we kind of hold as parameters for what we, sense of bottling and for consistency's sake. So in any case, there's those beers in our cellars that might be really low in titratable acidity. So if we have something that's too high in acidity, if the base blend's too high, during that blending process, we'll start looking at, okay, hey, these barrels need to go in there because we got to get that acidity down, because when you taste it, it's just way too tart. And we look at pH. pH is a good indicator of, general indicator, but titratable acidity for us that's that spec that we use, we put on the label. And for blending purposes, that really helps get you right back to that titratable or tactile sensitivity that you get from drinking something at that similar TA. That, and then the gravity, of course. So if we have things that are really maybe not moving along or higher in gravity, you can blend that down with stuff that's super dry.
Sure.
In the sense, this is something that Firestone's always been doing from day one, where we kind of opened our minds up to the idea of blending for consistency's sake and also for quality's sake.
That sounds, it's gotta be exciting to come into work and to kind of get to go through that process. It's challenging, right? It's not something that, like you were saying, it could take a lifetime to learn this. And it seems like it's, it's just a completely new aspect of brewing for someone like you to come into and go, every day, every barrel, everything I look at is completely different. How do I kind of corral this into something that's recognizable from batch to batch? It's got to be exciting.
That's a challenge, and that's a challenge that I prepared for 13 years working up in Paso. Was how do we keep consistency, the reins on consistency, with all the changes that were happening over the course of us growing, of new brew houses, of new packaging lines coming in, and although I wasn't creating beers by recipe design, it was the challenge for me, which kept me in the game, was how do we keep these beers relevant and consistent through all these changes? And that, in a sense, that's what we're doing now, just with there's a different set of variables, but almost the same way of thinking about things. It's keeping an open mind and really understanding your numbers and understanding your the attributes and the parameters that you have to work with.
So there's definitely subjective and objective kind of things you're looking for to determine when a beer is ready. I guess to kind of figure out that question, or the answer to that question, or the kind of getting the point of the beer is telling you when it's ready. Would you say it's more subjective or more objective? You've got to hit these kind of numbers that you're looking at, but is it really going to be a more subjective thing, saying, we've got the same palates trying this beer year to year, this is what we think?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't want to get myself in too much trouble with my bosses, but it's a balance, I guess. The only way I can say that there's a balance of that. We're lucky to work with vintages here, and we're striving to make better beer every year as we grow this project. So what came out as, in all honesty, like the first time we tried what Agrestic was out of barrel in 2000, I think it was in 2009, it tasted great. It really did. I was surprised. I was really lucky that things didn't go south on me, that things weren't acetic, that when I brought that first glass into Matt's office, kind of proudly gave it to him, he said, "Yep, just keep doing that." So I was like, "Oh, great. What did I just create? Like, I don't even know what I just created. How do I do that again?" And so, the first time releasing Agrestic, or 500 cases of Agrestic, was a huge challenge. And then really it's a whole different ballpark here now. Like, it's a whole different game we're playing. It's not just creating one or two barrels back in 97 or 2007. It's creating, 400 barrels of a year now, this thing, Agrestic, whatever it might be, but knowing that there are now parameters that we've instilled to make that beer, and to allow us to recreate that beer.
Right.
So we do have a loose idea of what, of our QC parameters, and it's good to hold true to those. It's not as stringent as it would be in Paso for any of the beers we're releasing up there. But ABV is something that we try to hold true to. Titratable acidity, we try to hold true on that, and then also finishing gravity, where those things are lying. There's no one telling, there's no machine telling us what Agrestic tastes like, and so it's the historical imprint of our taste, that on our taste buds, of what we remember as Agrestic to be when we try it off the tap, when we're blending, trying to give ourselves a reboot, an idea of what it is. But in a sense, we're always trying to make, give it more depth and keep it as a viable beer, and keep it interesting.
Sure.
And the same thing up in Paso. I mean, they're constantly tweaking recipes in Paso to try to keep them viable and keep people interested. And you'd be surprised behind the scenes what goes on up in Paso. To the layman, you're drinking an IPA every day, and that's like your go-to IPA. But the amount of effort that goes into keeping that IPA relevant as seasonal crops change, and as
right.
Supply and demand changes, it's a big change. It's a big task for those guys.
That's the big thing now, especially with the hop shortages and
and so I basically can just queue up what Agrestic is from the brew house up there, and know that roughly about 90% of the work's pretty much done.
Right.
And then we can put it in a barrel here. If we keep our inoculation cultures alive and healthy, and we're consistent with what we're doing on that side of things, we can generally, I guess without doubt, get within about 95% of the work done right up front. And then the question of how long do we let it age, or when do we say it's done, or when does the beer say it's done, that becomes a very big prominent part of the puzzle when we're blending and trying to keep consistency. So one of the things that I've done from a standpoint of building in options is just continue to brew it all year long, and trying not to use all one batch at a time, trying to build in kind of a Solera idea, not in effect of like emptying half a barrel and filling half a barrel, but just keeping my volumes in my cellar from different ages, so I have options to go from different batches to see how the age is affecting them, how different barrels are affecting them, how size of barrel, be it punch-in, foeder, or 60-gallon wine barrel, how those beers are affected by surface area and the effect of them, the cultures inside those. So those are the options I like to have at my fingertips when I'm doing those blends to keep consistency. So that is kind of a objective idea when it comes to the blend.
Cool. I mean, so again, I've had the great fortune, even though I'm way over here in Miami, to sample a lot of a lot of what you guys are doing over there. And there seems to be this really like beautiful kind of like underlaying. I can tell this is Barrelworks kind of beer. You know, I can tell that you guys produce this beer. And you know, as you go through, I went through 2 or 3 in one night, and I could tell, you know, there's like these kind of like characteristics that are Barrelworks, which is awesome.
I don't know. Tell me.
Well, you know, I had to go back to my tasting notes. I keep a big binder of tasting notes, but I remember specifically saying to myself, I can tell like there's these underlying kind of notes that I see across these beers, and I love that. I mean, it was kind of a house flavor, you know. I mean, it's which is something I thought was really cool, and I you know, the other thing I thought that I've been able to kind of pick out is that the beers that you guys are putting out, like you said, you're trying to aim for that complexity. I mean, there is so much to these beers. One thing is right when you pour it out of the glass, what it smells like, what it tastes like right out of the glass, and then what it smells like, what it tastes like when you're at the bottom of the glass. Completely kind of different experience. It's such a really cool thing to go through one of your guys' bottles and to really appreciate and take it in. And I know that other people are feeling the same way, because I know that when you guys have your, what do you call them? What do you call your releases?
Liberations.
Liberations. You guys get massive lines, right? I mean, are you guys holding on to any beer after those liberations? I mean, is it sold out kind of immediately?
Yeah, I'd say 2/3 of the beer is sold out that day. We do try to hold a certain amount of cases back to keep something for future releases, or sort of for vintage. We call it a vintage release in the future. We're also holding some beers back for our Venice location, which is opening maybe April, I think. So we want to keep, you know, stoke the people out down in Los Angeles, give them a little bit of bonus for, you know, letting us move down there and be part of their culture. So, but for the most part, I'll hold like 10 cases back for lab purpose, just for historical purpose to have, and then that's it, you know. Then
as far as allotment, as far as what we're planning on selling today, it's gone.
Yeah, a lot of times it's gone. Yeah, like you want to hold on to it because it's your baby, but you know, the idea is, I think I learned this a long time back, was just like the best place for this beer is get it out of here, get it in the consumer's hands, get it drinking, and get people buzzing about it, because you know I think that's what I get most of my buzz off of, is just hearing back from people and hearing that they're enjoying those beers, and that's what we're here doing. You know, we're here making beer for people.
Yeah, was it kind of like when you originally started kind of these liberation releases, and now a bunch of people are going to be trying your beers, and a bunch of people are going to be trading your beers around the country? Was it kind of like, you know, a major amount of pressure that you felt coming from the Firestone family name, where it's like Firestone Walker is known for these superior quality GABF gold medal over and over and over again? Did you feel any pressure by that?
Yeah, I can't say like that's what kept me up at night. I think, you know, as long as we were, you know, doing making smart decisions here along the way, I mean, that's what we've learned to do. That's what we've been training to do to get to this point, was just, you know, make smart decisions, think things through, ask a lot of questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions to people that, you know, if you don't know the answer. So I've had a lot of help to get to this place, and I think, you know, the community that's opened up for Firestone in many facets has really been helpful for, you know, us to be professional brewers. I mean, for anybody to be a professional brewer these days, they can't say that they haven't had any help. You know, I think everyone owes somebody a pat on the back to get them through some tough spots. I wouldn't say that, like, you know, the idea of the pressure of Firestone and the lineage of what we've done as a company, as far as creating a legacy of amazing beers, that's something, like, I think for people outside of the industry, they think a lot about that. I'm always amazed when people come up and they're just, you know, their eyes are wide open and they meet you and they're just so thankful. And a lot of us, you know, I think I could speak for myself and possibly a couple of the brewers up in Paso, but we live so close to this, and this has become our life and our career, that, you know, we buzz off of just making the beer. We love, you know, the challenge of doing it, and we love a good challenge. We're all super highly competitive people.
Right.
we have that energy when we're all together, and I think that's what Barrelworks has, that energy in it too. It's it's a challenge. It's like we want to make the best beer, and we're not afraid to say like we're gonna do it. We want to try. But again, the consistency side of things, and the repeatability of what we've done speaks highly to the brewers of El Paso and the quality control program that they employ up there, and amazing recipes and a very overall like collective sense of what these flavors are, what these beers are that we want to drink. I mean, that's from the beginning was we want to be brewers to make beer that we want to drink, and so that complexity comes from us constantly being honest with ourselves during the process of making these beers, and taking sips along the way and saying, hey, this isn't doing what it used to do to me. I'm not getting that pixie dust feeling. I'm not floating on air right now. Like we got to do something. We got to change it, and not being afraid to speak up when you're not buzzing from that sip, and not being afraid to speak up when you don't feel comfortable with a process that's going on, or seeing something that doesn't make sense to you. And that's the overall culture that Firestone's always had, and I'm happy to be part of that. And happy in the beginning of that, helping to ingrain that idea and that philosophy into this company, being the quality control manager. And I just took that with me. I take that with me wherever I go, really. But that's what happened to Barrelworks. I think it's that same thing of being very honest and trying to question yourself on every move you make. Really, it's like rock climbing. You don't want to just blindly just reach out and grab a handhold without first checking it. Right.
And it's something I tell people all the time too. Is it's kind of along the same vein of if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. It's the ability to check yourself. And take that kind of like, oh, that's not where, or somebody else telling you, for example, like, hey, that's not where it needs to be. Being able to kind of roll with that, it's important. And you guys have a great team over there at Barrelworks, so I'm sure that you guys are, giving each other very constructive, honest criticism all the time.
It is. I mean, you just can't be afraid of it. I don't think we would hire someone that can't, take it, that would take it too personally. I think that's just, that'll work itself out. But it also takes, a management team that's willing to listen to people too, and listen to good ideas, and also constructive criticism when they hear things that don't make sense. So, sure. And for anyone to be, successful in a business culture, you have to be really open to ideas, but also really understand your process.
Sure. What would you say? I mean, so going forward, I guess, we were kind of talking about numbers earlier, kind of in the beginning of the interview, next year, what you're projecting to be numbers wise, but like what, I guess, this might be a really kind of general question. So answer as you will. What would you kind of see as, the future of Barrelworks? If you could kind of have one or two goals for Barrelworks in the next 5 years and into eternity, what would they be?
For 5 years I haven't thought that far out.
Okay. All right. Well, then eternity is definitely out of the picture.
Yeah. I think this next few years will be a huge challenge, just from a space, footprint, spatial challenge, be it that our square footage that we have here at Barrelworks is slowly being sucked up. We've got about 3,000 barrels of beer sitting on the floor, liquid barrels right now on the floor. There's not much more space that we have open to, put in much more volume. I think if we're going to be increasing volume, it's going to be outside of this building. So the challenge of starting to look for the next storage room or the next barrel room is on the table. There's some options already in this neighborhood we live in. There's a couple wineries that are looking to move out. There's a couple nice buildings that potentially have option for us, but not till probably 2017, late 2017. So we'll have to make do with the space we have this next few years. So that's a challenge for us. The idea of increasing our production also has to do with moving beer out of barrels and into bottles, and that's going to be, I guess, there's a real good option for us to potentially get a new packaging line this year coming up that will allow us to basically double our production speed, and then shorten these long packaging runs, and to be able to empty barrels faster and get beer back into barrels faster. So just moving more beer in and out of barrels is a option for us. So, and then also fermentation capacity is also limited at this moment right now. So dropping some more fermenters on the floor is another side of this year's, I guess, our production challenge. So overall, 1,200 barrels this year out of production. We're looking at trying to get to about 3,400 next year, which is going to be a stretch. If we can get to that's definitely going to be a lot of learning involved in that, a lot of checking ourselves and being truthful if we can move that fast with the volumes that we have. And then the idea is just trying to get it up toward the volumes that they're doing out of Paso with the proprietor's reserve release products, which I think they're doing about 7 runs a year at around 300 barrels. So I think that production, that's around 7,000 barrels a year. I have to do the math for you, but I think comfortably the Matt and David they see maybe around 5,000 to 7,000 barrels a year out of Barrelworks. I don't see it ever really getting much, huge. But again, it's, there's a lot of cards on the table right now with the help from Duval Morgat and their interest in Barrelworks, which is they have a huge interest in what we're doing here. So there might be some more option for them to help out with the immediate needs of us to grow. So, and again, it's like if we can do it, I'd love to do it. I mean, to make this program bigger and bigger, sure, and keeping the consistency and quality that we have, I love that challenge. I'll take it.
It's awesome. I mean, for me, I would love it because already with the Duval kind of merger, should we call it? I've been hearing rumors that we'll have Firestone, at least the clean production beers, down in Florida in the next year or so, which I'm like, please. So it'd be great, if you guys are producing enough, you can actually distribute some of it. We can find some of the Barrelworks stuff down here too. It'd be fantastic. But I'm sure the rest of the country feels the same way. So I guess the last question I have, that I've kind of thought up prior to, is, for a lot of home brewers that are out there kind of dabbling in this sour beer production, wild beer production, even some home brewers going and building a little bit of an oak program, is there kind of one piece of advice you'd give, like one kind of, do this, do X, when it comes to producing these kinds of beers? And then that's pretty much all I got.
One piece of advice. Oh, well, I think you and I had a good discussion about this, and it's not just one question. It's probably a few hours worth of conversation that we could have on this subject. But I think off the top of my head, and usually like the thought that floats to the top of your head is usually the most relevant. Sure. Just don't pigeonhole yourself with just one beer. Like try a couple, more than one. Put a couple different beers in barrels and do different treatments. And because this beer takes time to make, and putting all your eggs in one basket, that saying, you never know, the outcome could be, could be great. You could be very lucky, like I was, and have something that comes out that, at the right time and the beer tells you it's perfect, and you're lucky, and then you have to recreate it. But, learning from what you do and trying some different treatments, working with some different, keeping really good notes on what you do, but, being consistent with your inoculations, but trying different things that's how I started this project, was looking at, I got say 400 barrels to produce next year, and I've got, 80 barrels here, or 400 barrels, or 600 barrels. You want to do, like painting, you want to do some understrokes, see how that goes. Do some really bright stuff over here. Let's do some under-inoculated stuff over here. Give yourself some tools to work with, because coming to the table to make a painting and you have one color, it's kind of tough.
Sure. That is kind of the first thing you told me too when we had that conversation. So That is obviously the first thing that comes to mind. So,
Yeah. I like that metaphor of a palette of colors, you know, and that's what really helps me stay calm in the blending circus that it is that there's options, and giving yourselves options to work with. It's really imperative to doing what I'm doing right now.
Awesome. Well, it's been about an hour, so
right.
I think we have, like, yeah, it was a great time. Like Howard said, Howard Stern says, I think you've said it all today. You know, he closes all the interviews. You know, it was awesome. I'm so happy I got to interview both Jeffers and you separately. We were originally gonna do it together, but I think it worked out a lot better to get both of your perspectives separately. It was really, I mean, it's entertaining for me. I could keep going and going, but I find that people aren't going to watch more than an hour. So with that said, thank you very much. Look forward to doing more with you guys, and hopefully Firestone and Barrelworks ends up coming to the East Coast and South. It is on the East Coast, but South soon.
Oh man, we'd love to have our beer out there for sure. There's so many great breweries out there too. I got to come visit you.
Yes, sir. All right, man.
Cheers.
Awesome. Cheers.